According to a 2023 survey report, We Never Give Up the Fight, a report of the National LGBTQ Plus Women's Community Survey, 43% of their respondents said that their childhood faith traditions became a source of conflict because of their identity as an LGBTQ plus woman. This episode is about Kim's life in liberating herself from ideologies connected to religion that she was raised in and how the women around her influenced her own liberation. I'll introduce our guest now before playing the previously recorded podcast interview. And she's not only someone that's very dear to me, but is also my brother's childhood friend. Kim Guerra is a queer woman of color. She is a butterfly woman who has given herself wings. She's a writer, advocate, and an entrepreneur. Kim is the creator of Badass Bonita, a brand and movement that she considers to be a work of self-love and her love for her community. Kim is the author of Mariposa and Mija, collections of beautiful poems, affirmations, and revolutionary love letters. She recently released her newest book, Badass Bonita, which is for all humans who are giving themselves and their community wings through revolutionary love. Kim received the Agent of Change Award from Univision's Premios Juventud and has been recognized for her work in various publications, including Oprah Magazine, People, Huffington Post, and more. Kim continues to use her voice and platform to advocate for immigrant, LGBTQ+, BIPOC, survivors, mujeres, and oppressed communities. She was born and raised in LA County, San Fernando Valley. Kim graduated from Cornell University and received her master's in marriage and family therapy from Antioch University in Seattle. She's currently based in Los Angeles and Quintana Roo, Mexico, but I think she's also floating around. With that, let's bring her in.
Oli, ¿cómo estás?
Bien, bien. So, listeners, Kim and I actually are family friends. We've known each other for quite a few years. More than anything, she knows my younger brother very well. So we go way back.
Sí, un abrazo. Shout out to Christian.
Bueno, Kim, it's so good to see you here and to be with you so that we could learn more about you because as when we were preparing for this episode, I was telling you, like, where do we start? Like, there's so much with you because as you all heard, like, Kim is not only a poet, Kim is also a therapist. There's so many different experiences that Kim has, and all of these experiences come with layers of healing and stories that can resonate with a lot of us. I think let's go ahead and jump right into it, Kim. I was very impacted by many aspects of your stories, and one being when learning that you grew up from a very religious family. I'm wondering if you can talk to us from there and your experience of what beliefs you were instilled and what ended up happening.
Claro. Y thank you for having me. I'm very grateful to be here. I feel very grateful for the work that you do. This is one of the many important conversations I feel like we need to have, or I needed to hear growing up, especially growing up in a religious, very strict upbringing. Y ahorita cuando la gente me ve así que me dicen de loca, como que no conectan, that is also part of the roots many of us grew up in, growing up in the church. I grew up like it was a Catholic background de chiquita, and then my family started going to like an evangelical Pentecostal church after my mom immigrated. She was crossing the border and she made a promise to God saying like, okay, if I can cross without getting deported and being sent back, I will go to church and I'll take my family. So that's how my family started going to a church when we got back to the States. In the beginning, it was like a source of hope, but then it became a source of love and hate and fear and judgment and shame all put together in the name of God. For me, I've always pursued a personal, like spiritual relationship. So sometimes like I would read the Bible and I would tell people at church, hey, like what you're doing here and how you're acting is not what the Bible says. And they would get mad at me. Y poco a poco, I started to get more involved, but no me quedaba callada aún en la iglesia, but I was still trying really hard to be like this good Christian woman. And that is part of what led me to, I was in university being a good Christian girl. I was like the president of the Christian club in my university. And for me, so much of what kept me there was one, like the spiritual experiences I was having, pero también it was tied always to shame. It was always tied to this aim for perfection, this aim for trying to, in a way, I felt that that was a way out of my trauma and suffering that I grew up with because there was still a lot of trauma and abuse in my house. And this gave me hope to como que alejarme de eso un poco. But then it was another type of trauma que también me atrapó en muchas maneras.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think it's something that, as a therapist, I've heard about as well, with how my clients have been impacted by family, community, church. And we're also not creating this episode to shame anybody that's in the church and that has a positive experience. I think we all know or should know that there's different ways of practicing and different beliefs that each church house holds. And so we're listening to Kim's side of the story. So, Kim, another aspect of this que te inculcaron, right? Ese marianismo that you are self-sacrificial, and that you prioritize the needs of other people, and that you have a role in life here on earth as a woman. You ended up getting married. When did you figure out like this isn't the life that is true for me?
Desde chiquita yo decía, yo no me voy a casar porque I feel like marriage doesn't work. Yo veía puros matrimonios, puras relaciones que no estaban sanas. So I had made up my mind. I'm like, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to live like that. Yo decía desde chiquita, me voy a ir a un rancho, voy a adoptar animales, unas cabras, unas gallinas y voy a adoptar bebés yo solita y voy a estar feliz. And then I started getting very involved in the church. It was like the purity culture, and it was a very laid out path for me. It was like, okay, you start dating and you're dating to marry, and then you don't have sex until you get married. And I remember I told my mom, you know, I like started dating the president of the Christian club and he was a worship leader, and everybody was like this, like, you know, power Christian couple, like, oh my goodness. And, you know, the pressure to be a good example. I remember I told my mom, like, okay, after college, I want to travel and I want to pursue my career. And I remember she said, like, no, so you're graduating, and the only way you can get out of my house is if you get married. And I knew that I couldn't go back to that house because the house that I was trying to escape the abuse and escape so I remember feeling this pressure from my mom, from the church, from the community that I was a part of. It's like, okay, kind of like my way out and my way forward is to get married, and, you know, then I'm going to make everybody happy, and I'm going to, you know, check off all the lists. I'm like, okay, I graduated from high school. I graduated from college. I got married. I waited till sex to have, no, I waited for sex. I waited to get married, to have sex, and all of these things that I was like, okay, I'm just like checking it off so that I can make others happy and others proud, and in a way, like, prove that I'm worthy of love and acceptance. And that was also part of like the calladita culture, where I was just like, pues, como que si soy una niña buena, una niña calladita, una mujer decente, then I felt like that was going to take my pain and my trauma and my suffering away. Ya cuando entré al matrimonio, I also noticed how everybody was then treating me different, like a señora, like, okay, now you're married, now you have to serve your husband, now your main role and your main purpose in life is to make sure that he's okay. I remember I wrote about this in the book that my mom and my grandma came to visit, and this was like we were newlyweds, and I was like, okay, I told my mom, ¿dónde quieren ir? ¿Qué quieren hacer hoy? He was still sleeping, and I'm like, okay. And they're like, oh, let's do this. I'm like, okay, vámonos, ándale, arréglense. Like, pero, ¿cómo que nos vamos a ir sin hacerle desayuno a tu esposo? No le has ni preguntado, está dormido, pobrecito, se va a levantar y no va a tener nadie que lo atienda. And I was just like, es un adulto, no se va a morir de hambre, hay comida, si no quiere hacerse nada, puede ordenar algo y nosotros nos podemos ir, no va a pasar nada. It's like not the end of the world. And they were looking at me like, kind of like one
Like,
ashamed of me, like, oh my gosh, what type of wife we raise you to be? And then another part, como que se sentían like little, como que niñas que estaban haciendo una travesura, like, oh my gosh, okay, vámonos pues, como, no le digan a nadie. Um, pero, so I just kept noticing that, and I also started to go to therapy during that time, and I started going to get my master's for therapy, and that's when I started to learn more about having agency and standing up for myself, setting boundaries, and not shrinking. And I have realized that I spent so much of my life shrinking and so much of my life serving others and feeling that was the only way people would love me. And I also started to learn how, like, the institution of religion and the church was not the only way for me to have a relationship or experience with God and with faith. And to also get in touch with my queerness during this time, and como que muchas puertas de mi mente se abrieron, kind of stepping out of the boxes that I was raised in, and learning more about me, learning more about life, que se me abrieron puertas que I'm like, I can't go back after knowing this and seeing this.
¿y cuántos años tenías at that
I
point?
got married at 22, like a week after I graduated college. And then I started my master's I was like during this process when I was 20, 22, 23, and I got divorced at 24. No, sorry, 26.
How did your family take the divorce
Fue,
news?
fue un proceso muy doloroso. It was very painful, very lonely. I got so much shame, shame from my family, shame from the church, shame from most of the people that were in my life at that time. Como que me juzgaron muy fuerte and made me feel like I was a failure for giving up. And they did not understand that instead of giving up, I felt like I was
Mm,
finally fighting for me and finally having the hope and strength to give me the life and the love that I deserved. Porque también
yeah.
the marriage that I was in was not a healthy one, and it was um, something that towards the end I would call my mom every day crying, and I would be like, ya no puedo, como que ahora pasó esto. And even after calling and, kind of asking for help from my family, from my parents, it was always like, ay, pobrecito, ¿qué va a decir la gente? ¿Qué va a decir la gente? Pero como, ¿qué va a decir Dios? En la Biblia dice esto. And so it got to the point where I had to just be like, okay, como nobody else is living this life and nobody else is
Mhm.
experiencing what I'm experiencing right now. And I'm the only one that can and will fight for me in this way right now. Entonces, como I stopped como talking to my family about it, and I remember I like printed out the divorce papers solita y me encargué de hacer mi
Mhm.
research, and I did it myself, and it wasn't until the divorce was finalized that I went to my family. And it was actually finalized around my birthday, so I was like, my birthday gift to myself is this divorce, this liberation. Ya les dije, me pueden apoyar o no, pero ya está hecho. Es su decisión, yo estoy feliz, and this is one of the proudest moments of my life. Entonces, como que, I'm gonna go celebrate, you do what you gotta do.
See, you just dropped the mic on them, and you're like, I'm free. This is something that you needed to
Exactamente.
do, and you made that choice. And it wasn't easy because I think when you confronted your family, you knew you were risking losing them at that point, and that would have been
Sí,
on them. Y pues,
exacto.
we also talked offline a little bit more about the role your grandma played in all this. And so I'm wondering, as you were exploring your queerness, what role did she play in your life?
Sí. Y es como, I love that you said, like, it's like the risk of losing them, pero también it was like, I'd rather lose everything and anyone, but not lose myself again. And
Right.
that was part of stepping into my queerness too, que parte de mi terapia fue conocerme, aceptarme, amarme. So even just like my queerness was just something so natural about me that I got to know and love and accept. And my grandma has been a very important part of the whole process porque, como te está diciendo, da un pasito para adelante, un pasito para atrás, pero también eso a mí me ayuda a entender que just like my queerness and coming out and my identity has been a process for me, it's also a process for them, que también ellos están enfrentando muchas cosas que it's like conflicting for them to know. You know, I remember when my grandma, like somebody outed me to my grandmother when I had my first girlfriend, and she called me saying me das asco. You know, she was just like really, really harsh. And I grew up in a very homophobic home. Escuchando estas cosas, las lesbianas me dan asco, eres una pinche lesbiana. And so those were kind of like some of the first responses that I got from them. I remember that my uncle actually talked to my grandma and told her, if you love her, the most important thing is that you want to see her happy. And if she's happy being who she is and loving who she loves, and you want to be part of that, you need to change the way that you're acting. And she called me and she apologized y hemos podido tener conversaciones. Como I feel like even if she doesn't understand everything, as long as somebody remains curious, it opens up doors to have conversations um, that are productive and constructive.
So she goes back and forth with supporting you. And I think it's a matter of her also dealing with con todo ese marianismo that she also grew up with en sus tiempos and all the conflicting information because the love is there. And so she wants
Claro.
to fully be of support, but she's also been embedded with all these like ideas that say don't accept, anything else that I didn't grow up with. Y pues tell us a little bit about those moments when she would get mad that others would offend you.
Sí, hay una historia que ahorita me río, and I wrote about this in the book, que there's this time that she was talking to mi tía, and mi tía was like, like la Kim le salió la pinche lesbiana de la familia, and then my mom's like, mi tita's like, ¿cómo se atreve a decirte una pinche lesbiana? Le voy a partir su madre, yo ya le dije que si te vuelve a decir una pinche lesbiana otra vez, le voy a partir su madre. And at first I was like getting mad, like with her, I'm like, yeah, you tell her, you stand up for me, gracias, tita. And then I was like, wait, no, I'm like, pero sí soy una pinche lesbiana, le dije, y no hay nada malo. Está diciendo la verdad. And I'm like, no, like I had to kind of reframe it myself too, where I'm just like, sometimes like la palabra lesbiana la dicen como que si fuera una mala palabra, como que, como es una lesbiana. And I'm like, pero sí soy. Y estoy muy orgullosa de serlo. Entonces, soy una pinche lesbiana. Entonces, no me ofendo que me digan que soy la pinche lesbiana de la familia porque así es. And, you know, my grandma was like listening and I was like going off, like, quiero que vean que yo soy una lesbiana que se ama, una lesbiana libre. And, you know, she was listening. She's like, okay. Pero de todos modos le voy a partir su madre. And I was like, okay, tita. Like, ya tú haz lo que tú quieras. I tried. I'm like, I tried. So it's one of the many times where she pops off and is trying to trying to do her best.
Yeah, yeah. She's figuring it out. Pero ahí
Exacto.
está. No, qué bonito. Tener ese apoyo cuando le nace, cuando lo expresa. Y pues, we'll go ahead and talk a little bit now about your book, your newest book, if people can see it through my blur, Badass Bonita, Break the Silence, Become a Revolution, which goes hand in hand with your grandma's energy and your energy as well. I think this is intergenerational here. Unearth your inner guerrera. So, what was the inspiration for this book, or when did you start writing it?
This book, como que it's like the book that I've always wanted to write, but I've always been afraid to. Como que se sentía como una montaña. I'm like, but the if I'm honest with you, siempre regreso a un momento that I was in my master's program and I kept looking for like books that talked about Latinas and healing and mental health and the specific things that we were dealing with so that I can bring that to my class and my research and the type of work that I wanted to do. Y I kept looking, y encontraba muy pocas cosas. And the things that I did find at the time were either very old and written by white people or simply very recent and written by white people. So I just like kept getting so frustrated and I was like, okay, como there's very specific things that I'm looking for that I need for this research. Y dije, I'm gonna have to write it myself. Pero lo dije como like joking antes de que yo escribiera nada, antes de que yo pensara que yo podía hacer algo así. But I just remember feeling like there was something missing that I was like, if nobody does it, I'm going to have to do it myself. Y ya con los años me puse a escribir y puse a encontrar mi voz y empecé a trabajar con mujeres mariposas, the cohort program, the coaching program, and there's very specific things que para mí eran importante compartir, como que I feel like it was like medicine for me in my healing journey that I wanted to share with other people in their healing journey, con las palabras, con las historias, con el contexto de nuestra cultura, de nuestra, like very, como una combinación que no se necesita traducir nuestras experiencias, like a knowing that's not usually, todavía no se encuentra tanto.
It's like a memoir. It's like self-help. It's beautiful, habla de temas muy fuertes, abuso, trauma, pseudo clients of the system as well. Y pues, buen hecho, Kim. Te felicito. Eres un orgullo. I'm so proud of you, of what you have birthed, not just like your coaching programs, but obviously your books and community. This is truly healing. As I was reading it, I was just like, oh, wow, like I want to cry, but I have to hold it together because I don't have time right now. But I had to put some chapters down because si das mucho sentimiento con tus palabras.
Sí, I don't want it to be like, como si a self-help book, nomás como que checking off the boxes. No, es como que algo que quiero que, I want it to be full of like las banderitas and highlights. And it is a book that you will have to put down. Como I don't want it to be a book that you read all in one sitting, que va a ser un libro que vas a tener que leer poco a poquito y tomar tu tiempo. Como que dejes que te abrace y lo abraces también y que vas a hacer, como que this book, I feel que te va a poner a trabajar un poco en el corazoncito, pero que no te vas a sentir que te estás ahogando, pero más bien, ok, como que estás navegando aguas profundas y no te vas a ahogar y que sabe que te va a enseñar un poco a nadar mejor y acompañarte en tu camino as you learn to love yourself and set yourself free. De que habla así, de temas de usar nuestra voz, habla de no quedarnos calladitas, especialmente like knowing how harmful it is for us cuando nos aguantamos, when we hold in our truth, when we don't call out abuse, when we don't hold people accountable, when we don't hold ourselves accountable for our own life and for our own decisions. So I want it to be a book that you go to over and over again and that every time you pick it up, que te ayuda a sanar un poquito más.
Así es, that was my experience of it. And I think that it's going to be very well received. I think by the time this episode is out, it will likely be out. Pero Kim, one of the almost final questions that I have is also from your book and your experience. For somebody that has walked through a similar thing that you have, what's some guidance that you can give to people listening that can resonate?
First thing is, if you believe in a higher power, if you believe in God, if you are a person that has faith and or practices any spiritual practices, como I want you to know that you are loved and that you are worthy and deserving of a love that does not include shame for who you love and who you are. Para mí, like, thankfully, I always felt loved by the God that I believe in. And I always felt supported in my spiritual walk. But I also met many people that have been hurt and blamed and hated and shamed and oppressed by people who say they believe in a loving God. And then they're very hateful towards people that are different. So I want the first thing people to know is like to take away the shame from your sexuality, from your orientation. If you are gay, lesbian, pan, sapphic, trans, non-binary, you are loved and you are worthy of love. I think more and more now there's different communities that have sprung up for people who want to practice faith and spirituality that does not include hate and shame and fear. Is I always think that that's something that como needs that there needs to be a bridge where people can practice any spiritual practices that they want and not feel that it has to exclude their queerness or their full expression of self. And I also am a firm believer in making homophobes, racists, misogynists pissed off by how free and liberated we are and how much we love each other. Que sí, que las tías criticonas, las personas de la iglesia, muchas personas like get pissed off by seeing me happy and by seeing me be free and by seeing me be loved and love somebody. Para mí eso me da más fuerza, and I hope that it gives you strength too, that you're making people uncomfortable with your freedom. You're making people uncomfortable by you loving you. The systems of oppression thrive when they see that the people they're trying to oppress oppressing themselves. When we internalize that oppression and we see ourselves through the eyes of the oppressors, that's when we have a lot of internalized homophobia ourselves, or we hate ourselves for being queer, for being gay, for being trans. And there's so many times that when we unlearn that internalized depression, ahí es cuando todo cambia. Pero empieza muchas veces por aquí adentro, and believing that we are worthy of love and worthy of happiness and peace and joy and safety.
For people that are allies like myself, I think it's also important for us, whether we are a friend of somebody, a relative, an acquaintance, that we also step into our privileges that society holds for us, and that we use our voice, we use our bodies to help, folks as well, to defend in whatever way is also safe for you, but definitely that is safe for them as well, right? That we don't normalize any hate, we don't normalize discrimination, and we do what we can in those moments to stop the hate, and we are greater in numbers as well. So when people psychologically start seeing other people stand up for what is right, people will step in thanks to your voice as well.
Yes, thank you for saying that, because como que aunque no nos demos cuenta, there's so much privilege in being in a straight hetero couple. Y por ejemplo, yo cuando estaba casada, I was like married, I was Christian, I was married to a white man. Those things at that time I didn't know, but gave me so much privilege. La gente me trataba diferente y mejor because of those things, not only in society, but in my family. Como, mira, una bonita familia cristiana con un hombre blanco, un hombre gringo. Like, they're like, you made it. You are like making all of us proud. Mm-hmm. Y when I said no to all of that and embraced like my queerness, and I started to be in queer relationships, and when I was not identified as like the good Christian girl anymore, the way that those privileges were like stripped, y como que I felt the weight of that so strong in my life. Y entonces como when you have those privileges, use it. And do not, como for me, it helped so much when I was going through my process, like to have people in my family, in my community, step up and step in for me. Like my uncle who talked to my grandma, que le dijo, how you're acting is not okay. And if you love her, you got to change what you're doing. If he had not spoken to her, I don't know if my grandma and I would be speaking today. If my brother had not stepped in with my mother and said, you're treating her differently because she has a queer partner and that makes you uncomfortable. Like, if you're going to treat her that way, you're going to treat all of us that way. Or you're going to treat her the way you're treating all of us. Pero la verdad que se necesita tener estas conversaciones and to use and to be an ally, especialmente en nuestras familias, que ahí empieza muchas revoluciones.
Sí. Bueno, Kim, muchísimas gracias por tu tiempo, por compartir parte bien pequeña de tu historia. Can you please share where people can learn more about what you're up to, where they can buy the book, just where they can find you?
Claro. You can find me on Instagram, Bonita, on TikTok. Y you can find the book too on, well, everywhere books are sold. September 17th. You can pre-order it now and get a free sticker. You see, you can also like email me, lo que sea. I'm very excited and very grateful for this process.
It's been a long time coming. And so I look forward to also seeing all the beautiful things come your way from this and in the future. But poco a poco, right? Like we're going to
You
enjoy the
see.
present moment, the launch of this. I'm going to have all of Kim's information in the description as always. This episode is on YouTube for those of us listening on the podcast. Y Kim, muchísimas gracias. Te quiero mucho y te felicito.
Gracias, yo también. Thank you for who you are and what you do.